Revelation chapter 8, let's look down there at verse 12. The fourth angel sounded his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of them turned dark. A third of the day was without light, and also a third of the night. One verse, talking about, again, aspects that we see. It's talking about stars, and just to put it, I'm just going to put 3 stars up there because it talks about a third. It talks about the sun. What else does it say there? The moon. Well, I'm going to just maybe put the moon as a moon, and then that's it. Okay. Now the interesting thing about this that I want you to notice, there's no reference to the earth. There's no reference to planet Earth. There isn't any discussion about it here in this particular one. And what that needs to do or remind us immediately is that we're not talking literal here. Now, before I go any further, I think it's very important. Lots of people always ask me the question, but Christ talks about the literal aspects of sun, moon, and stars. So just keep your hand there and just jump with me to Matthew 24 again. One of the things I think it's important to do and it's to understand that when you're talking out of the book of Matthew or Luke or Mark with relevance to the last day events, end of time events, we are talking from a literal understanding. So for example, if you read verse 1, Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to the buildings. Now, what do you understand from that? Is that really happening? Is that something that historically, it's like watching a movie. You see a person coming out of the temple, walking away, and as it says, walking away from the temple, and then they say, let's look at the temple. It's quite clear to understand that if you were watching this, you'll be seeing them looking at the temple. It won't be symbolical. It's really happening. Somebody's walking away from the temple. Somebody's telling them, check it out. So there's a literal aspect. And so when we read there, and I want you to look at this with me, I want you to go down to, well, let's jump with this. Go with me to Luke chapter 21. The same thing, just to bring it out to show the same thing. Luke 21. And if you go down to verse 25, there will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. Now, straight away, when you read that and you think of Revelation, we're just talking about the sign in the sun, moon, and stars. Some people associate that and they put that together. You cannot do that. Okay. Here in Luke 21 or Matthew 24 or Mark 13, it is referring to a literal aspect. So that means if you're reading in Luke 21 where it says that there will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars, you need to understand that there will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. It's not anything else. And the importance of this, let me give you an example. If you had to go to the story of the we say 3 wise men because there were 3 gifts, but of the wise men who go to Christ, let's have a look at that. The 3 wise men who come to Christ at his birth, Matthew chapter 2. The interesting thing that always catches our attention there is that these wise men, if you look at verse 2, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. What do we pick up here? Again, it's a literal story. There are wise men who go to a person who's been born in a manger, but they're on their way to him, but they end up in Jerusalem first. They come to Herod, they ask Herod, where is the king of the Jews? Where is this new child that's been born? And the question is, how do you know about him? Well, we saw his star. Now, what are we picking up here? That it's a literal star that caught their attention. They were astrologers. They studied the stars. This star also appears, and it leads them. Now, the interesting thing is that they were, if we would say it, heathen worshippers. They didn't believe in the writings of the Jews, for example, and yet one of their main prophets, which was Balaam, one of their main prophets, right in the beginning, if you... I think it's in Numbers 22. If you had to go there, you would find that Balaam is asked. Remember, you know Balaam from the story of the donkey, where he's riding on his donkey, and all of a sudden the donkey, he's hitting it, and the donkey stops, and he keeps hitting it, and the donkey finally turns around and talks to him and said to him, why are you hitting me? And don't you know that all these years since you've been riding me, since you've had me, I've always looked after you, but now you're not. And then all of a sudden his eyes are open and he sees that there's an angel standing with a sword. Now, Balaam was initially a prophet of God, but because of his love for money, listen to what's happening. Because of his love for money, because of his need of power, he wants to do what the heathen king asks him to do, and that is to curse the Jewish nation. But in his attempt to try and curse the Jewish nation, instead of cursing them, every time he opens up his mouth, he blesses them. And then finally the king said to him, but I'm paying you to curse them. Why don't you curse them? And he said, well, what God has blessed, who can curse? And then he makes this prediction about a star that will be rising up.
Did they relate stars to Earth?
Well, that's very important. Your heathens will always see, or your unbelievers would refer to nature in order to identify any great thing that would happen. And I mean, it's not new. I mean, what do people do with astrology? What do you go and do to try to find out what's going to happen in the future? And I'm going to say something that's going to sound quite weird. But we look at the moon in order to find out what's happening on planet Earth, don't we? When do we know if it's a spring tide? No, hang on, but when do we know if it's springtime? Give me how do we determine springtide? When the sun, moon, and the earth are in alignment. Not just the moon is in alignment. Springtide is when you have the gravity pull of the sun, moon, and the earth all aligned up. Then you have springtide. You have this incredible high tide. When you have just the moon in its full capacity, you only have a high tide, but it's not springtide. So we govern, we even know, and even then you get these stories coming out about vampires, or especially werewolves, that when it's full moon, you better make sure that your neck's closed up and you've got garlic, wearing garlic or something like it, because and we say this, and yet it's not strange, but the sun, moon, and stars actually have an impact on us. But so in a sense, these people follow a star because their prophet indicates to them that a star is going to be there and it's going to guide you. And so we have quite clearly here that God uses nature to speak to, and I'm going to use the words here, unbelievers. Now, I want you to be very clear on what I'm saying here. If you as Christian are relying on the sun, moon, and stars in order to confirm your faith, you are relying on what heathen would rely on. What Christians should rely on is the Word of God. Now, now, I can tell you more about that, but I want you to understand, so when we're talking about the sun, moon, and stars in Matthew and that, God, and I want to make it clear to people, ask me, Willie, but will God use nature? Yes. He's going to do it. He's going to use nature. I mean, people are trying to figure out what's going on because of all the earthquakes. And we've spoken about this before, if I'm planning to build a house and it's near a river, what will be one of the first things I will do in order to determine where I must build my house?
Build a dike. Your floodplain.
You what?
Build a dike.
Build a dike.
Check the floodplain.
You'll check the floodplain. And then if I see the water's right down at the bottom, will I just build my house close to there, or will I check where was the highest level the water ever went to? So in some sense, we use nature to determine how we're going to do things. Yes.
I just want to, I think it's not only he will use, I think he is and he was and it's always been, because when you read Psalms 19 it says the heavens declare the glory of God. The sky of God proclaims his handiwork. Day to day he pours out speech, and night to night reveals his knowledge. There is no speech or language, nor are there words whose voice is not heard.
Now you see, this is, and you jumped a little bit ahead of me, but that's all right. Psalm 19 I was going to bring out. The problem with the world is that we are not communicating. Okay, and I'm going to show you the relevance of the stars and the moon and that in. Now let's go back to Revelation chapter 8. I want you to understand that when you look at Revelation chapter 8, if you are saying to me, Vili, okay, does that refer to the sun, moon and stars? Literally, my answer is no. But I want you to understand that it can be yes, but not in relevance to Revelation 8. Do you understand? If you use in Revelation 8 to tell me that there will be signs in the sun, moon and stars, my answer to you is only on the grounds that I read it like in Revelation chapter 6, where it talks about the sixth seal being opened. It says there was a great earthquake, the sun turned black like sackcloth and made of goat's hair, and the whole moon turned blood, and the stars, etc. That is literal, and I can prove that. But when I'm talking from Revelation 8 about the sun, moon and stars, we have moved from the plane of literal to the plane of symbolical. Now, and I'm going to show you why. Now, what we need to do about sun, moon and stars is understand then, okay, if we're not, and already in some way with the discussion we've had, if I talk about sun, moon and stars, we in some way are communicating. If I speak to my son in London, he will say to me, Dad, we are about, I think they're an hour now still ahead of us or whatever. But there comes a time when we actually kind of if I phone him at 9, he's at 9 there. But there's times when he will phone me and it's 11 o'clock here, and with him it's like 8 o'clock, and we say, hey, listen, don't you realize some people sleep after 9? And there's this lack of, and it's because when the sun is messing us around. The sun isn't waking us all up at the same time. And so we have this problem when we rely on the sun to try and communicate. If you want to speak to, let me give you an example. If you want to speak to somebody in, Australia, they're already a day behind you. They're not a day ahead of you. But if you want to speak to someone in America, you're a day ahead of them. So already we have a problem when it comes to communication. You'll see why I'm emphasizing this. When it comes to the sun, moon and stars, we have what is full moon to us is sometimes still new moon to another part of the world. You understand? It's not seen the same. The constellations of stars that we see during our summer is different to the constellation of the stars that we actually see in the winter. There's a slight variation in where they appear. So the sun, moon and stars don't always, we know that if you wanted to find out how to get to the North Pole, you will actually use a compass to do that. But things can affect the compass. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that when it comes to Revelation 8, we are not talking about that. But yet we need to understand that the reason why God is using the sun, moon, and stars is to hint something. Now, let me just take you with me. And I'm going to show you aspects, but I want you to go with me, first of all, to Genesis chapter 1 and the creation of the sun, moon, and stars. And to identify immediately what are we trying to get at. Because we have a problem that is happening. But it's not really about the sun, moon, and stars. It's like when we studied the one about the water turning to blood, the sea turning to blood. Some people have come to me and said to me, Vili, that's the red tide. You've heard of red tide, when it just wipes out all animals, and if you eat those animals, you die too. So that's blood tide. No, that's in nature. It's not the aspects revealed in Revelation. I want to make it very clear. It's not the same. You have to be very careful. As I said to you, it doesn't mean that it can be literal, because I've just shown you Matthew 24 says there will be signs in the sun, moon and stars. But when you're reading Revelation, you have to first understand we're talking symbolical. And so you have to move away from the very things that you would normally look at and say, okay, what are we talking about? Now look at Genesis. Yes.
Doesn't it ever talk about anywhere in the Bible that is the case with Revelations? Okay, so I understand what you're saying, and I've been coming a few years now, so I understand that Revelations is this
symbolical
stuff, right? But take it like that. And the reason I'm saying this is often when you have people that want to criticize the Bible, they will refer to this Revelations and they will quote things out of there that, you know what, this book's crazy. Okay. So where does it say anything like that anywhere?
To answer.
Don't take that seriously, but the rest of the book we want you to take seriously.
Okay, but let's have a look at what you're saying. Revelation, first of all, is a prophetic book. Okay. It's different already just in its presentation. It's not historical, it's prophetic.
Does the front of that chapter say that?
It starts off in Revelation chapter 1 that I'm going to show you what is to come.
Okay, cool.
Do you understand? So when it talks about prophecy, I mean, how do you if you were living in the early 19th century and you wanted to tell people about the cell phone, how would you do that?
By describing it with things that you know in that time. You won't be able to describe it with what we have now. So you use language, symbols that
will somehow draw my attention to it. So what I'm trying to say to you is that, your question is a very good question. You've actually helped me with this by trying to define that there is literal and there is symbolical. When you're talking about, now I'm saying this to you, you're going to see a literal fulfillment of prophecy. You understand? You are going to see that there is, when it talks about the sun, moon and stars, something happening to them, that is literally going to happen. But the symbols don't say it's going to be with the sun, moon and stars. I have to interpret what it's saying. Just as we've discussed, that the mountain that was all ablaze, that fell onto the sea, was not a literal mountain.
could be a meteor.
Well, it's not literal. You can't make it a meteor.
You know, sorry, just to also come here, you know, for a verse, to answer your question, when we read the onset of the book, verse 9 of chapter 1 of Revelation says, I, John, your brother and partner in the tribulation and the kingdom and the patient endurance that are in Jesus, was on the island called Patmos on account of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. Now verse 10, I was in the Spirit. So immediately it tells us that he was in vision. So everything thereafter, what we are reading in Revelation, is what he saw in one single vision.
Well, you see, you've just done something there. Let me just link to what he's done. John was on the island of Patmos. Now, let me ask you what. Is that literal or symbolical?
It was literally there.
Literal.
Yes.
But then he says, I saw. Immediately he is seeing something. There's no question. He's seen it with his eyes. But it's in spirit. But now he's seen something. Although he's now using language, I see this lion coming up out of the sea, or this beast coming up out of the sea, and it has the head of a lion, etc., and all of that. He's using the language he can to explain the picture, but that's not what he's seen.
It's not actually literally there in front of him.
There is something more.
It's in the spirit. And so I would use that as the verse in Revelation.
But let's just jump back again, because I want you to understand. So to have answered that, the importance in reading Revelation chapter 8, and we're talking about the fourth trumpet now, is you have to understand we're not talking literal here. Let me explain why. But we need to go to literal aspects to try and understand what it's saying. So let's go to Genesis chapter 1, and I want you to notice that God does something in verse 14. And what he does there, he says, let there be lights in the expanse of the sky. Now notice, where does it say? What are we talking about there? Let there be lights where? On earth? In the heavens. Okay, I want you to understand here, planet Earth is not in this picture. And therefore, if it's not in the picture, we will have this natural thing to say, well, we don't have to worry about it. Because we are on planet Earth, so what's happening up in the sun, moon and stars has got nothing to do with us. No.
How do you know when to plant, when to read?
Yes, hang on, but no, I want you in the symbolical understanding here. The earth is not in the picture, so our tendency will be to say, we don't have to worry about it. But I'm saying to you, the reason why God has given that is to show you something that you might feel it's got no relevance to you. Listen to what I'm saying. Because it doesn't involve you. It's like some things happening in America, but don't worry about it. It's not in South Africa. It's all right. No. There is something happening that is affecting planet Earth, and I'm going to show you this. And the interesting thing about this is that you're going to pick up why it's so important to understand. Genesis chapter 1. So we see there's this light in this expanse of the sky, and just Tony, carry on reading it there. I'm going to stop him every now and then, but I want you to understand why God puts the lights there. What's he done?
Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth.
Okay, so what's the first thing it's doing?
Giving light.
Giving light on the earth. Okay, carry on.
And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night.
Wow, so the lights are governing the day and governing the night. Now that's interesting. Listen to the word governing. They're doing something. Okay, carry on.
He also made the stars.
Also made the stars. So it almost sounds like, oh, okay, but let me just make something. He also made the stars.
But there's only one light though. How can there be two?
Now, well, the light of the moon, it's true, is a reflection. That's a brilliant observation. Now, man, you're already starting to say something that the moon doesn't really have light.
Yeah.
But so when you're in darkness, the only way to get light there is sometimes by means of the moon. But the moon is not really the star.
No, if you mess with the sun, you mess with the moon.
Exactly. So we have this. So there's all of this type of stuff that's starting that if you look at it, but then it carries on. It doesn't stop there.
God set them in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness.
What does it say? To do what? Separate light from darkness. Now the question right here is, and I'm just going to show you, is was there no light and darkness before this? Because it says to separate light from darkness.
There might have been light somewhere and darkness.
No, but if there was no sun and moon, how do you have light and darkness?
Presence of God.
No.
Presence of God's.
No. Genesis chapter 1 verse 3 says, let there be what?
Light.
There was light already. Because it says at the end of that, and there was evening and there was morning and it was the first day. How do you get light and darkness where there's no sun? God created the sun in the sky so that we will understand where light and darkness comes from. Now, I don't want to go into this, but some people say, what happens if the sun burns out? That's all right, because there will still be light. Light was already created before the sun was created. You see, now we say, no. But I don't want to go into it. But the point I'm trying to make here is we were given the sun, moon, and stars to decide where light is and where dark is. And that's why you can say, no. Okay, so that's the first thing we need to understand. It was given for purposes. And if literally it is the sun, moon, and stars that are going to be affected, then we are literally going to know something's happening. But the strange part about it all is that it's happening, but people don't know it. Because it's not really happening to the sun. Because it's not really happening to the moon. And the problem is, we are starting to find it difficult to find out when it's light and when it's dark. And what I mean by that, if you come to a decision you have to make, it's not black and white anymore. It's grey. And the thing is now, will somebody please tell me, should I do this or shouldn't I do this? Because it's grey. Something has happened to the sun, moon, and stars. You'll see why I'm doing that. I want you to go with me to another thing, and I'm trying to show you what's happening. But I want you to look with me in the next major event that takes place on planet Earth after the flood. Okay. And it's found in Genesis chapter 11. There is something that there's been this major catastrophe. What has the catastrophe been?
Well, twofold, rain and then flood.
Flood. Okay, so we have this major flooding of the world that in the end, how many only survive? According to the literal historical record of God's word, only 8 make it. How many animals?
Available.
All those that go inside the ark. We have no idea of the amount, but we know a lot went in. And
I know the dinosaurs didn't make it.
they didn't make it, because it doesn't say dinosaurs went in. But anyway, the point that I'm making here, that is why we have the Ice Age. Okay, but let's carry on. So now listen to the thinking. Verse 1. Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. Listen to that. So if I said something to you, would you understand what I was saying?
Yes.
There wasn't a problem. There was no problem with communication. Universal, one language, a common understanding. And they say this, as men moved eastwards, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, listen to the thinking. They said to each other, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They used bricks instead of stone and tar instead of mortar. Why? What was their objective behind all this? Now, it's amazing. They used bricks instead of stone, tars instead of mortar. What is it already telling you about their thinking? What have they done before? They built houses out of stones and out of mortar. That's already saying something about how they used to build before the flood. So we get the impression that they are building out of stone and out of then. But now they've changed their method. They're not building out of stone anymore. They're now building out of brick.
Well, maybe because there's only 8 of them.
Now this is a lot of people by now, okay? They're building out of brick and tar now. Now my question is, any of you builders here? Okay, why do you use tar on a building?
Probably to waterproof it.
Amazing. It's still something we learn. Put tar on the outside of a brick wall. In a sense, you're putting a damp course there, stopping water from coming through. What am I starting to pick up about this building? They wanted to be waterproof.
Yeah.
So let's carry on. So then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens. What's their whole planning? Man, you can bring us a flood again. We know where the flood line is. We will make sure that the building is above the flood line. With a tower that reaches to the heavens so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the whole earth. Now listen to that, scattered over the whole face. There is this attempt for unification.
I'm sorry, you just okay, you're going to go there, how do you scatter people?
I'm going to show you how you scatter them now. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the men were building. Now listen to the conversation. Now there's a conversation, and I'm always amazed that I always like to think it happens between the Godhead. They're looking at this mortal man. It's like Zeus looking down at a mortal man. Well, I'm just kidding here, but this is, I want you to look at this. And it says, the Lord came down and looked at the city and that the men were building. The Lord said, if as one people speaking the same language, they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Now what he just said, this unity is too powerful. I'm going to show you why I'm bringing this all out.
Hang on.
So a little bit of devastation causes mankind to suddenly become
Unified.
There's choice in this.
It's going to come. I'll show you. Come, let us go down. Now God is saying, come, let us go down and what? Confuse their language. So that they will not what?
Understand one another's speech.
How do you disperse people now? Tell me, what is God's plan that is so brilliant? Does he go in with war? Does he introduce sanctions? Or does he just change the language? Now, what is the United Nations? Just tell me, first of all, when we use the terminology United Nations.
Can you imagine standing there, building that tower, and you shoot your mate, pass me the hammer, and he gives you a sword. Pass me the hammer.
Yeah.
He gives you a sword.
And that's going to be, and yeah, he's going to be sore soon. You're going to take the hammer and smack him. The point I'm bringing out here is that this is brilliance. This is divine wisdom.
I don't see why that was clever of them to change languages or bring in new languages. What's the point?
It stops them from communicating.
But why?
What-
What's wrong with them communicating?
Pardon?
What's wrong?
Because they were building a tower. You can, unless I'm going to ask you this. I love what you're saying. Do you have a computer that is not Apple?
Yes.
Okay. Can your computer speak to Apple?
No.
Why not?
It wasn't designed to.
But there's a problem. You need some kind of software so they communicate. What's the problem with most of the things that we have? Unless there's communication. Have you ever gone to the bank to try and sort out a problem? You don't talk to the right people. And sometimes when the person sitting in front of you is speaking your language, he doesn't understand what you're saying. There is a serious problem with trying to resolve problems when there is a lack of communication.
But how is that going to benefit us? I mean, if we can all speak the same language,
Hey,
we get somewhere fast.
but let's have a look at, it's true, but look, what did God say? What did God pick up? If man is left to do this as one. Now, I'm going to say something to you that we don't seem to realize, but the fact that you have access to everything on Google.
Yes.
You want to know how to build a pipe underneath a place. You can go and Google, even if you've never been to varsity, and you will get information pouring in. And some of the stuff is maybe, woo, and other stuff is brilliant.
Yeah.
But you have also got access to brilliant minds outside there that are putting down information that you have now got access to, which before you never had access to. Let me give you an example. I just downloaded, it cost me $500. I got a fright when I saw that. All the Birds of South Africa. It was David's Bad Influence. But it's a software package that you can go to, and if you see a bird, you can press it and you can actually hear what it sounds like. It tells you its habitat, everything. It's actually just the bird book put onto DVD. Now, I don't have to worry about now. I can go anywhere and I'm communicating with the rest of the world because of satellite and because of internet. I can be anywhere and I'm communicating. Hey, people, I saw this bird over here. And immediately throughout the world, everybody who's interested in knowing about that bird will pick up what I've just posted here. Posted, use the word posted.
There's a free app on Google that does exactly the same.
Oh, thank you for telling me now. But anyway, the point I'm trying to bring out here is that communication is the means by which, why do businessmen sit around a table when they're looking at a project? Because if you don't get to the same page, the probability is you're not going to do the same thing.
Put all the pieces of the puzzle together.
It's a serious problem, communication. Now, the brilliance of this all is that because of this, and I want you to notice something now. Verse 8 says, first of all, that tells you that confusion did come in. They couldn't understand one another. So the Lord scattered them. Listen to that. He didn't literally scatter them. But what was the problem now? The moment you can't communicate with a person, you scatter. You actually look for the people that do understand you. Have you ever watched ants when they're walking along? I know, small minds are influenced by small things, but I would sometimes take my finger, take some spit, and I would draw a line across their pathway. That ant would come and all of a sudden, and he would start running all over the place because I've just messed up his scent trail. I've messed up his means of communication. And how many times in your life doesn't somebody come along? And I want to tell you this, gentlemen, your experience between you and your wife, can you always communicate in the same language?
Depends.
When you're busy, it depends where the mood is. Yes, that's right. Do you understand that something goes wrong? And what's the biggest problem there? My advice to you is when you see that happening, scatter. Don't stay there. You are not going to get a communication going. Scatter. Okay, the point I'm coming back. Let's have a look here. Verse 8. So the Lord scattered them from there all over the earth, and they stopped building the city. Now I want you to notice, that is why it was called what? What was that city called? Babel. Now I want you to listen, the word Babel, because the Lord confused the language of the whole world. What's happening here? The means of communication is going to be confused. The Lord is going to confuse what we rely on in order to be able to work together as one. I'm starting to hint towards something.
Take over the internet.
Well, no. United Nations, the objective of the United Nations, already there's a word that stands out. Nations is not nation. It's not a united nation. It's United Nations, which means already I have a group of people not speaking the same language. And if you have a look at Italians, oh, sorry, this has been... If you look at a bunch of Italians and you see how they speak, they use their hands a lot. You understand what I'm trying to say? There's a problem with communication. And in one country, one continent, we have a variation of countries that you can travel through the countries, and the moment you go from one place into the other, when you walk into France, that bloke will not speak to you in the language you've just come from. Even if he understands you, he will not answer you back, because you must be French if you want to be in France.
But if you're a refugee, it's fine.
Pardon? And yeah, unless you're... But so that's a good thing, eh? So in this sense, what we're picking up here is that there has been an attempt ever since Babel for man to actually get back to a place where they could do what they used to do. Achieve great things if we could only work together. So now, let's jump back to Revelation 8 now. Already we see that something is happening. The stars are the means by which we actually find our course. If you're on the seas and you want to find direction and you don't have the moon and you don't have the sun out, they find direction by means of the stars. We know what time it is of the day because of the moon. The sun, I mean. We know that the moon is there, and when the moon does, we know what to expect. When is the best time to go fishing? When's the best time not to go fishing? We can study all of that from the signs of the sun, moon, and stars. And it says to me that all of a sudden, what we were relying on to determine of working together, something is going to go wrong there. Now, you find you must remember, since 1844, this has been the experience. It's not something new, but it's something that's going to be highlighted in the end. There is an incredible attempt in the world that we will get to a place where we will communicate as one. I mean, there's problem with money. What did the euro try and attempt to do with the financial problem in Europe? Was you had the Deutschmark, you had the whatever, and all of a sudden everybody know every time you cross the borders you had to, how much money is your money? I mean, just look, listen how we talk now. When you compare your money, you look at the dollar or the pound to find out if we are strong. Where's the best place to go on holiday? Well, don't go to America and don't go to England and don't go to Europe either anymore. And you know, there was a time you could go to Mauritius and get away with Mauritius because they had the rupee. But now you can't go there because they've gone to the euro. It's like, where do you go now with your money? Oh, well, we can go to the Far East because there at least it's still 2 of their money to our 1 rand. Lucky we are much stronger there financially. But even that's starting to disappear. So the way in which we measure, and we all try, and so now, you know, I told you about the smart card before. And the smart card about 25 years ago, a friend of mine, even longer, was working on the smart card. And guess who was behind the smart card? The French. Now you might find this very strange, but they were the ones that was trying to figure out how can they get it so that money will be taken off and you're only using a card. Nowadays, you look what's happening. The smart card has become almost the everyday thing. You go and buy something. Oh man, I forgot to draw money. Oh, here's my card, thank you. Chung, chung, chung. You don't see the money disappearing, but it's going. You have a card that you can use anywhere in the world. It's all of a sudden, it's not rand, although you see it's changed. What you thought you were buying for £5, you all of a sudden realize in your money was like, you shouldn't have bought that. But you use your card and it says, okay, thank you. There isn't one, like, what are you, dollars or pounds? No, it's your card. And so we find that there's this attempt to actually bring the world together under one banner. And God is saying, okay, you can try as much as you want to. I'm going to affect it. I'm going to come down. As I said, God said, let us go down. God, I want you to make it very clear to you, is involved in making us not speak the same language for our own good. Because if we could speak the same language, we would be doing things that will be Holocaust orientated. And I'll explain that more why. So we have the sign in the sun, moon and stars here. It's what's happening is that somebody's moved the cheese. And I like the way that book is written. It says, who has moved the cheese? And I have an answer. God has moved the cheese. And then we think, okay, but you know what the interesting thing about the cheese is once the cheese has stayed in a certain place for a while, we almost think that's now the new norm. And then the bloke writes a book again, who moved the cheese again? It's like, who moved it again? And the point that I'm trying to bring out here is that there is this plea made, Revelation chapter 18, there is this plea made by God. Verse 4. Then I heard another voice from heaven. It's amazing, God is appealing. He says to them, come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues, for her sins are piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes. Now her sins are what?
Heaped up high as heaven.
Piled up to heaven, which sounds like the Tower of Babel again. They're trying to do things. And God says, don't get involved in that. The world is attempting to save itself. Don't get involved in that. Come out of her. So we find, and the her here is Babylon, and the word Babylon has its original roots in the word Babel, which means come out of confusion. Come out of the darkness where you don't know where you're walking and walk into the light. Come out. I'm the light bearer. So we find this very interesting thing that God is taking what people think is the solutions and is confusing it. He says, but if you really want light, come to me. I am the way, the truth, and the life. You want to know the way? If you want to know what's really going on? I mean, you think of Solomon, his words are in the end. Here is the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. He concludes in a very dynamic way that if you want to know what light is, that is light. The word of God is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. We all of a sudden find that in the confused world that there is something that is light, and that's this. Now, the period here, just prior to 1844, which was known as the Dark Ages, why was it known as the Dark Ages? In actual fact, people say to me that it was a bad time, but in that time they started to discover things. There seemed to be light. The invention started. We started to find vaccines. We started to find, there seemed to be, there wasn't light. No, there was light. But the true light was dressed in sackcloth. The real purpose, and what I'm trying to bring home to you, the real purpose for being on planet Earth, people don't know why they're really here anymore. They think it's just about seeing how much money you can get before you die. Or how powerful you can be before you die. Hang on. Is death the end of everything? You see, the interesting thing is that if you really want to have light, it's not about what's happening here, it's what's going to happen afterwards. So in some way, and I want to jump back to certain things. Now, the interesting thing about the sun, moon, and stars, most of these symbols are used in heathen mythology or heathen religion. Most of these symbols you will find in heathen thinking, which already says to you that their thinking and the things that they are telling you is going to get darkened. Their own people will start questioning the light that they have. I believe, and I mean this sincerely, that I thank God that there will be, in some sense, literal aspects by which we can identify if something is following the stars or if it's following God, by the symbols that they use. And you all know what I'm talking about. Be careful. When you see a symbol, it's a warning to you. Watch that light. You know, I can't help it, I'm going to use this, but I think of the Muslim religion. They claim that Muhammad was the last and the final prophet, that he was the one that gave the great light, that the Quran is the final message of God to planet Earth. And you look at the symbol that they utilize, it's a little nerve-wracking. And God says, thou shalt have no other gods before me. You know, the Son of Righteousness is Christ, not the Son. The most amazing thing that we pick up all of this is that we are going to find that the things that we use to try and say or do the things that we are doing are going to be challenged. Do you know that? And I'm just saying this. Let me use the Muslim because that's at least a very strong one. But Muslims are getting concerned. I just spoke to a Muslim just recently. His father died. And he was worried. And I was, why are you worried? You know, wasn't your dad a faithful Muslim? Yeah. In actual fact, he was busy reading the Quran when he died. Wow. Then there's no doubt about it. He's going straight to heaven. But that's not how they believe. And so all of a sudden there was this, is my dad in heaven or is he not? Because what do they measure to decide if they've made it? Against the goodness of their lives. Man, that's a fearful place to be. And a lot of those people are starting to question. Maybe we should listen to this Christian stuff, because they say that at least Christ can save you. That it's not a salvation of behavior, but it's a salvation of faith. You know, and so there's something happening to their little sun, moon, and star. What I want you to understand, what is the day that everybody's scared of? I want to tell you that when you die, and you can say what you want to. I've been at so many deathbeds at so many different religions, and they all ask the same question: what now? Are we ready? Now remember, this whole thing, and I want you to understand this whole thing that we are looking at here is God's attempt to get your attention and to actually get you to ask the real question. What is life really all about? And life is all about, can you stand on that day? Will you have clean hands and a pure heart on that day? What do we want? That day of reward. Are you ready for that day? So somehow God is going to interfere. He's going to say, listen, you think that you're working out your whole thing and everything's going right. You know, if you've got a business plan, you're going to find your business plan. If it's affecting God's purpose in your life, He's going to mess your business plan up. To say, hey, it's not about that. Get your priorities right. What's your first priority? Seek ye first the kingdom of God. Once you've got that priority right, everything else will be all right. But we're allowing things to influence that main question. And I want to tell you, the deathbed, as I said, they've been rich and poor, black and white, English or whatever. When I speak to them, the main concern is, what now? Am I ready? You know, the brilliance about the plan of salvation as far as Christian is concerned is, yes, The thief on the cross is a perfect example. Will you confess Jesus Christ as the Savior of the world? Will you accept Him? Will you confess your sin? Will you do that? And if you do that, man, everything that's happened in your life is of no relevance, because you've answered the most important question ever, and that's the questions that the two had to ask themselves hanging on the cross. Do you believe in this person, or don't you believe in him? Rejection. Now, there's lots more I can show you about this, but rejection of this is rejection of the plan. So what I'm trying to say to you, God will interfere. It's going to be one of the means. There are other ways in which you can look at it. You know that suns or stars and things like that. I want to take you to one more verse and we're going to close off. I want you to go with me to Daniel chapter 12. It's the last chapter of Daniel, and there's a very interesting thing that is explained there. It talks about the last days. It says there in Daniel chapter 12 verse 1, Daniel 12 verse 1, it says, at that time Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will rise. Now, at what time? I believe in this last days he will rise. He's going to come and interfere. He's going to come in and he's going to start playing around with you. And then it says there will be a time of distress, such as not happened from the beginning of the nations till then. Now, lots of people think that is the problems that's coming on the world. I've got bad news for you. The time of distress is not about the problems that have come on the world, because problems have always been there. For example, if you were a Jew during the time of the Holocaust, you would have had a serious problem. It would have been a time of distress. That is not the distress. But what the distress the Jew experienced there would be this: if I die, am I saved? You see, the distress of this time that we're living in is going to actually bring us back to Jacob's wrestle. And Jacob's wrestle wasn't about how much money he had, how successful he was in business, because he had all of that. His problem was he had to meet his brother, and his brother was on his way to kill him. Now, was he ready to meet his brother? He tried all kinds of things to meet his brother. He wasn't ready to meet his brother. His brother would have killed everything and taken everything that he had. But he also finds that there's a wrestling match. And he was so worried about his brother that in the end he's wrestling with something else that's got nothing to do with his brother. And he fights his battle here. And what is this battle really about? Battle is really about what it's all about. If you've fought this battle and you've won this battle, that battle with your brother will be over. That battle with finances will be over. That battle for social acceptance will be over. The moment you've wrestled with God and you've prevailed and your name is changed, from the moment it's changed from Jacob to Israel, that moment you've won the battle. And when you win that battle, you are now ready for the day of the Lord. Even if you should die, if you should go and meet your brother and your brother should kill you, that's all right. You are ready for the day of the Lord. And most people are so worried about the things that are happening. And it's true, we must be worried. You know, the Bible doesn't say we mustn't be worried about it. But it says don't get so worried with that you forget to do this. Now, the most amazing thing about the story of Jacob and his wrestle is that after he had wrestled with God, he had a limp, he had wounds from the wrestling match. His hip was out of joint. He was walking along. Now, do you think he's ready to practice some stick fighting with his brother? No ways. But you know, the most amazing thing, the Bible tells me that when they meet, they fall on one another and weep. Two brothers that were enemies for so many years. What did God do between the wrestling match that Jacob had with God? What was God busy doing to Esau?
There was another wrestling match.
There was another wrestling match going on there.
Breaking them both down.
And he made them both open to change.
Life has a way of doing that.
Yes. So let's get back to Daniel 11. I want to show you something at that time. But it says, but at that time your people, this is again verse 1, everyone whose name is found written in the book. And I want you to understand something. All of these things are happening because God is trying to figure out, must I write your name in my book? Have you answered the question? Do you want to be with me forever or not? Yes or no? Yes? Okay, I write your name in my book. I'm extending, the Bible teaches another way, I'm extending to you an invitation. Are you going to accept it? Or are you too busy, with your business? Are you getting married? Are you going to test out your latest car? Are you busy with so many things that you neglect your RSVP? RSVP. Just do that. Then all these other things, if you're successful or not, really fall away. because the most important thing you were successful in. And listen to this. Is your name written? That's the question. Who will stand in the day of the Lord? Those whose names are written in the Lamb's Book of Life will be delivered. That's what it says there. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will wake. Now listen to this. Why will they wake? Because they have answered the question, do you accept Christ or not? To everlasting life. Others to shame and everlasting contempt. Means they didn't answer the question. They didn't accept the offer. Then it says, those who are wise will shine like the brightness of heaven. Now, what I'm trying to say is to you that you can be one of the stars or the moon or the sun in your family. You can be the reason why your family will be saved one day because you chose light. And those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. Now, to finish this off, I also want to tell you that stars fall. The sun will be darkened. Those people that we look up to guide us will fall. There's only one star that you can afford to look at, and that's the star that rises up according to Balaam in Judea, out of the house of David, out of the lineage of Jesse. That's the only star that you can afford to keep your eyes on, because he will not fall. Do you understand? He is the sun, and the only sun that you can keep your eyes on, because he's the son of righteousness, and he's not a moon. Do you understand? So this whole attempt here, you're going to see it more and more in the world. People that you used to turn to for guidance, for light, you have to figure out, have they answered the biggest question, are they really following the true light themselves? Because if they're not, you could be led astray. And those stars are fallen. I mean, one of the most powerful verses in God's word, it says, God says, I saw a star as if it had fallen to the earth. And the star that they're referring to is this mighty, powerful angel who once upon a time was, you could say, almost fourth in command of the universe. But his star, his brightness, fell. We have to be very careful what kind of stars we follow. There is going to be, the Bible says to me, and this is the tragedy of it all, there is going to be an elimination of stars. That means some of the stars that you were following are not going to be, don't follow them anymore. There's going to be a third of the moon is going to collapse, and a third of the sun. That means the things that we used to bargain on to guide us and help us to be unified are going to become the means by which there will be no unity.